My brother walked me down the aisle. Not my father. My brother, who was 22 and had never worn a suit before in his life, and who kept tugging at his collar the entire walk because he said it felt like someone was slowly strangling him. I laughed at that. I laughed because if I didn't laugh, I was going to cry, and I had already decided I wasn't going to cry over them. Not that day. My father was in Orlando. My mother was in Orlando. They had been there for 5 days by the time I said my vows, staying in the vacation rental my sister-in-law had booked for what she called a family reunion long weekend that somehow stretched into a full week. My husband's family was all there in the folding chairs on the lawn of the venue we'd spent 14 months saving for. My college roommate was there. My college roommate was there. My coworkers were there. The florist's assistant, who had come to drop off a last-minute order and just kind of stayed, was there. My parents were not there. I want to go back, though, because this story doesn't start at my wedding. It starts a lot earlier than that, and if I don't tell you the whole thing, you're going to think I'm leaving something out. I grew up in a small town in central Ohio, the kind of place where everyone knows your business and nobody really asks how you're doing because they already heard from somebody else. I'm the older of 2 kids. My brother, I'll call him by what I've always called him, which is just my brother, is 4 years younger than me, and for most of our childhood, that age gap felt like it might as well have been a generation. He was the easy one. I don't say that with bitterness, not anymore. He genuinely was. Easygoing, funny, the kind of kid who made friends without trying and got through school without a single detention. My parents adored him in the way parents sometimes adore the child who requires the least from them. And I was the one who required more. Not in a dramatic way. I just asked questions. I pushed back. I had opinions about things, and I wasn't shy about saying them at the dinner table. My mother used to say I was a lot. She said it like it was a descriptor, the same way she'd say I had brown eyes, or that I was tall for my age. Just a fact. You're a lot, honey. The implication being that the appropriate amount was less. I started working at 16, not because I had to, we weren't poor, but because I wanted money of my own that I didn't have to ask for. My first job was at a dry cleaner 2 miles from our house, and I rode my bike there every Saturday morning and came home smelling like steam and chemical solvents. My parents thought it was a phase. When it wasn't a phase, my mother told people I was very independent, and I could tell from the way she said it that she meant something slightly different from a compliment. I put myself through college. That's not an exaggeration, and it's not something I say for sympathy. It's just what happened. I applied for every scholarship I could find, took out federal loans for the rest, worked 20 hours a week at the campus library, and graduated in 4 years with a degree in accounting and about $31,000 in debt. My brother, when it was his turn, had his first 2 years paid for by my parents. I found out about it at Thanksgiving, mentioned almost in passing, the way you mentioned that you switched laundry detergents. I didn't say anything. I'm not sure why. Maybe because I'd already learned by then that saying something would only result in my mother explaining to me at length why the situations weren't comparable, and my father nodding along, and me leaving the table feeling worse than when I sat down. I moved to Columbus after graduation, got a job at a mid-size accounting firm, worked my way up to senior associate over 6 years, started dating a man named, and I'm just going to call him my husband, because that's what he is now. A structural engineer who coached recreational soccer on weekends and made the best breakfast burritos I have ever eaten in my life. We met at a friend's birthday party. He spilled a drink on my shoe, apologized 3 separate times over the course of the evening, and texted me the next morning to apologize a 4th time. I thought that was the funniest thing. I married him. We got engaged on a Tuesday. It wasn't planned. We were in the kitchen. I was doing taxes for a client on my laptop. He came home from work and just sat down across from me and slid a ring across the table and said, "I've been carrying this around for 2 weeks waiting for the right moment, and I've decided there is no right moment, so." I said yes before he finished the sentence. I called my parents that night. My mother said, "Oh, wonderful," in the tone of someone who has just been told the restaurant has a wait. My father asked if he seemed stable, meaning financially. And I said yes. And then there was a pause, and my father said, "Well, good." My brother called back an hour later to say he was thrilled, and also to ask what my husband's stance was on fantasy football. Because apparently that was the compatibility test he had decided mattered most. We planned the wedding for the following October, 14 months out. I sent my parents a save the date in January, then a formal invitation in June, then a confirmation email in August with the venue address, the parking instructions, the hotel block we'd reserved, and the timeline for the day. I did everything right. I am telling you this because I want you to understand that there was no confusion, no miscommunication, no honest mistake. They knew. They had known for over a year. In September, my sister-in-law, my brother's wife, announced she was planning a family trip to Orlando for the first week of October. Her parents, my parents, some cousins, a few family friends. Disney World, Universal, a few days at the beach. My parents said yes immediately. Flights booked within 48 hours. My wedding was October 11th. I found out about the trip from my brother, who called me in a panic because he had assumed my parents would obviously not be going, and then found out they were, and then realized he was the one who was going to have to tell me. He was upset. I remember he kept saying, I don't understand, and I kept saying, I know, and neither of us really had anything else to say after that. I called my mother. She told me that the trip had been planned for a long time. It hadn't been, she told me the previous month. And that flights were expensive, and that they hadn't seen my sister-in-law's family in 2 years, and that she was sure I understood. I said I did not understand, actually. She said I was being dramatic. I said I was getting married in 3 weeks, and they had purchased plane tickets to Florida. She said, you have always made everything about yourself. And then she said she had something on the stove and she had to go. My father texted me 2 days later. The text said, we'll celebrate with you when you get back from the honeymoon. We love you. I didn't respond to that. My husband, when I told him all of this, I had been holding it together pretty well, or at least I thought I had, sat next to me on the couch for a long time without saying anything, and then he said, okay, we're going to have the wedding anyway, and it's going to be great, and they're going to have to live with this for the rest of their lives. And that, somehow, was exactly the right thing to say. My brother walked me down the aisle. My mother-in-law fixed my veil before I went out. My father-in-law gave a toast at the reception that made 3 separate people come up to me afterward and say they wish their own fathers had said something like that. My college roommate caught the bouquet and immediately handed it to her girlfriend. We danced until the venue made us leave. It was a good wedding. I mean that. It was genuinely a good day, and I am not going to let what my parents did take that away from me. But then October ended and November started, and the silence for my parents stretched into something that stopped feeling like a pause and started feeling like a wall. My mother sent a card with a check inside, $200, made out to me and my husband, which is a fine and normal amount to give a niece you barely know, but a striking amount to give your own daughter as a wedding gift. My father sent a text that said, hope the honeymoon was nice. That was it. I kept waiting for one of them to say something real, to acknowledge what they had done, to say the words, something. I was not, I realized slowly, going to get that. What I got instead, in December, was a phone call from my mother asking if I was going to continue sending my monthly contribution. Let me explain the monthly contribution. About 3 years earlier, my parents had hit a rough patch. My father's company had done some restructuring, and he'd taken a pay cut, and some bills had piled up in a way that became difficult. I was doing well enough by then. I had been promoted twice. I had paid off a chunk of my loans, and when my mother mentioned on a phone call that things were tight, I offered to help. $300 a month. I set up an automatic transfer. I never made them ask for it. I just did it, because they were my parents and I didn't want them to struggle. They never said thank you. Not once. I noticed that. But I also told myself that maybe gratitude wasn't their language and that it didn't matter, and that I wasn't doing it for the thanks. I told myself a lot of things for a lot of years. Their situation had improved significantly by the following year. My father had moved to a different company, better pay, full benefits. My mother had picked up part-time work she actually liked. They took a cruise the summer after that. They remodeled their kitchen, new countertops, new appliances, the whole thing. I kept sending the $300 anyway because at some point it had just become automatic, in every sense of the word. So when my mother called in December and asked whether I was still planning to help out monthly, I sat with the phone against my ear for a long moment and thought about a lot of things at once. I thought about the save the date I sent in January. I thought about my brother walking me down the aisle. I thought about $200 in an envelope. I said, "I'll think about it," and I got off the phone. My husband and I talked that night for a long time. He wasn't angry. Or, he was angry, but he was the calm kind of angry. The kind that thinks clearly and doesn't waste energy on things that aren't useful. He asked me what I wanted. Not what I should do, or what was fair, or what my parents deserved. What did I want? I thought about it. I wanted to stop pretending. I wanted to stop sending money to people who had looked at a calendar with my wedding date on it and bought plane tickets to Florida. I wanted to stop being the daughter who absorbed everything without complaint and then quietly subsidized the family that made her feel invisible. I canceled the automatic transfer in January. Then, in February, I got a voicemail from my father. He said they were expecting the usual transfer and it hadn't come through. He said there must have been a bank error. He sounded genuinely puzzled, which somehow made it worse. The idea that it hadn't even occurred to him that I might have done it on purpose. I didn't call back that day. I sat with the voicemail for 3 days, listening to it twice before I did anything. What I did was this. I called my brother. He already knew about the transfer. I had told him in December. He had, without telling me, done some careful accounting of his own over the past several months. He had gone back through years of family financial history, the kind of meticulous reconstruction that takes time and patience and access to certain documents, and he had put together a picture of something I had suspected but never been able to fully see. Over the course of my childhood and early adulthood, my parents had set aside money, inheritance money, eventually, from our grandmother, and had made financial decisions about that money without including me. When I had turned 25 and asked my mother about grandmother's estate, she had told me it had mostly gone to cover end-of-life care costs. It hadn't entirely. Some of it had been distributed informally. To my brother's education. To the kitchen remodel. To other things. My brother had documentation. He is not, bless him, an accountant. But he is meticulous and he is fair. And he was angrier about all of this than I was, which I found oddly comforting. We spent 2 weeks going through everything together. We brought in a lawyer, a family law attorney my husband had used once for a business contract and trusted, and the lawyer looked at everything and told us what our options were. I am not going to walk through every detail of the legal process, because some of it was specific to our situation and some of it was tedious, and, honestly, a lot of it still makes my chest feel tight when I think about it too carefully. What I will tell you is that it was legitimate. Everything was documented. There were no tricks, no schemes, nothing I wouldn't be comfortable explaining to anyone who asked. There was simply money that should have been distributed equitably and had not been, and a record that proved it, and a process by which it could be corrected. My grandmother had been more thoughtful than my parents knew. She had left the letter with her attorney, not a legal document, just a letter expressing her wish that her estate be divided equally between her grandchildren. My parents had been named executor and had made their own choices about how equally was defined. My brother was willing to testify to what he had received. The attorney said the path forward was unusually clear given the documentation. We did not go to court. My parents, when presented with the documentation and the attorney's letter, did not want to go to court either. My mother cried on the phone. My father said I was destroying the family. I did not say a lot of things I wanted to say. I said, I want what grandmother intended me to have, that's all. The settlement came through in April. I am not going to say the exact amount, because that's private. What I will tell you is that it was enough to pay off the remainder of my student loans, which I did the same afternoon the transfer cleared. I sat at my kitchen table and made the final payment, and then I sat there for about 10 minutes, not doing anything, just sitting. My husband came in, saw my face, and put his hands on my shoulders without asking any questions. We put a down payment on a house 3 months later. A real house, not an apartment. 3 bedrooms, a yard, a garage where my husband immediately installed a mini fridge and a dartboard and claimed it as his workspace. I let him have it. He had earned it. I also set aside a portion of the settlement to fund a scholarship. It's through the accounting department at my alma mater. 1 recipient per year, given to a student who demonstrates financial need and is working their way through school without family support. I didn't name it after myself. I named it after my grandmother. I haven't spoken to my parents since April. That's not a dramatic statement. I'm not performing a cutoff. I'm not making an announcement. They called a few times in the weeks after the settlement, and I let the calls go to voicemail and then I didn't return them. And at some point, the calls stopped. Maybe they'll start again. Maybe we'll have a conversation someday. I don't know. I'm not holding my breath, and I'm not holding a grudge, which are different things that people sometimes confuse. My brother comes to dinner every few weeks. He thinks my husband's breakfast burritos are the best thing he's ever eaten, which I've already told you is the correct opinion. He and I are closer now than we've ever been, which is maybe the part of this whole thing that surprises me most. That the thing that could have divided us made us something more like a team instead. There's one more thing. My grandmother had a ring. Nothing fancy. A small sapphire set in plain gold, the kind of thing you buy when you're young and don't have much money, and you want something that will last anyway. She wore it every day that I can remember. I used to sit next to her on her couch when I was little and turn it around on her finger, and she would pretend to be annoyed and then she would laugh. When she died, the ring went to my mother. That made sense at the time. She was the daughter-in-law. She had cared for my grandmother in her last years. I didn't argue with it. As part of the settlement, I asked for the ring. Just the ring, nothing else attached to that request. My attorney included it almost as an afterthought. My mother sent it in a small padded envelope, no note. I have it on my finger right now. Sapphire, plain gold, exactly the size I remember. I've had to have it resized because my hands are larger than my grandmother's were, but it's the same ring. Some days that feels like the only thing that mattered.